Jeremy Narby, on behalf of the three brothers, Ian and Michael and Philip Baldwin, welcome to the Three Brothers Quest.
Thank you, Rob, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Brothers Three's quest.
I would agree. This is our second conversation, and I would refer our audience to our first, and of course, we'll link it in the notes here. Can you remind us how it is, Jeremy, that you came to discover what you called the Cosmic Serpent, DNA and the Origins of Knowledge, just to drop us back in?
Yeah, well, about actually 32 years ago, um, I was 33. I'll let you do the maths. And I wanted to write about the knowledge of Amazonian people. Um, I was working as a fundraiser for a Swiss NGO. We were backing Amazonian people and their initiatives to get their lands demarcated and bilingual education programs for their kids and stuff like that. And it seemed that part of what needed to be worked on was not just raising funds, but getting people in Europe, in North America, to have a better understanding of and respect for indigenous Amazonian people and their systems of knowledge. The historical context is that for a long time, Western priests, all the Westerners, including anthropologists who would
Mm.
go to visit these societies, essentially looked down on them and considered that they didn't really know anything. They were just savages. The point was to actually get out of that mind frame and start considering that actually they knew all kinds of things, starting with about their own environment, the plants, the animals in the Amazon. I mean, I'd spent a couple of years in the 1980s as a young anthropologist living with Ashaninka people in the Peruvian Amazon. And it was just obvious that these people who were mainly barefoot, living in the rainforest, had more names in their language for plants in their environment than science had given to those plants.
Mm.
In other words, they knew more about the plants in the Amazon than scientists
Mm.
did. So that was just one thing. It's a long-winded answer. I know you wanted something short, but it's kind of a long story. So um, 33 years ago, I started thinking about how to communicate to a Western audience what Amazonian people know about plants, animals, the world, how they think about things. The problem is that when you ask them, and as I had when I living with them, so what do you know? How do you know what you know? They knew all kinds of things about plants, and knew this plant had this property and could heal that, and so they had an like encyclopedic understanding of
Mm.
plant properties. How do you know what you know about plants? I would ask. They would say, well, we have our ayahuasqueros, tabaqueros. They take ayahuasca, they eat tobacco concentrate, and then in their visions, they communicate with the entities that are
Mm.
invisible, powerful, um, all over the place, close by, but somehow distant, and sources of information. And by communicating with these beings, they get information about all kinds of things, including other plants and their medicinal properties. Well, this is the enigma that set me off on this investigation that led to the Cosmic Serpent. Because from a Western point of view, it couldn't be true. If you think that there's verifiable information in your hallucinations, I mean, that's a definition of psychosis. In other
Mm.
words, you have to be nuts if you believe that.
Mm.
But that is effectively what they said is they put these teaching plants, ayahuasca, tobacco, and others, right at the center of how they know things. Just like if you speak with a biologist, they would point to a microscope. How do you know that a blade of grass is made of cells? Well, we have microscopes and we look in them and we see the cells. Ah, so right at the center of the biological knowledge, you have optical microscopes, electron microscopes. I mean, and so with the Amazonians, and what was kind of interesting was that this was like way off the radar of Western knowledge. So that's also why it's kind of was a long story. And I think you're asking, so how did it eventually get to cosmic serpents? Well, when you take ayahuasca, for example, seriously, as the Amazonian people do,
Mm,
the first, I actually took ayahuasca. The first thing I saw on taking ayahuasca was enormous fluorescent serpents like you've never seen in your life. And these are like huge, intelligent, fluorescent, intense entities. It certainly made me feel like smaller than small. And so, and the serpent imagery, the twisted ladder imagery, there's a whole complex that shamanism experts like Mircea Eliade have written about.
mm,
It turns out that two entwined serpents, or a twisted ladder, or twisted vines that reach up to the heaven. The axis mundi is a whole
mm,
theme in the history of religions, and in particular in shamanic ways of seeing. So and in Amazonian cosmology, so they have stories about how the world came into existence. They don't just say, we have ayahuasca and it allows us to interact with plants and animals and see things from their point of view. They also have a whole understanding of how the world came into being. And lo and behold, if it isn't in many cases a story that talks about a cosmic serpent coming from outer space and coming to this planet and then establishing all the different life forms through transformation. Or else there are stories that have twins in them, twin beings that show up and then transform themselves into all the other living beings.
mm.
So you have this complex across indigenous South America, but actually in many places around the world, where their understanding of how life came into being is associated with stories of serpentine twin being transformations of cosmic origin.
And again,
Um,
just while you're talking, every time I pick up this book, I'm just struck by here's the serpent,
mhm,
here's the DNA double helix, Crick and Watson,
mhm,
1953,
uh-huh.
ribonucleic acid. Um, so the twinned serpents are, it's fair to say, the mythological origin story, or one of them for these people.
Well, you see, yes. I mean, it's a very widespread. It's not. These are stories that are made to be told differently each time. They're almost like
Mm,
devices of transformation. They're about transformation, and they themselves are made to be transformed. So uh, every time you tell them they're different, this is how Amazonian people think about them. So it's not like there's one fixed story and everybody's telling it the same. It's not like a text. It's, but so it's like something like a Playmobil. You can sort of change it and switch it
mm,
around, but it's the same elements. It may look different, but basically, and that's kind of the whole point is that's also what life is like, is that it comes and it has these elements and then it transforms and transforms and transforms. And then suddenly here we are. We have this biosphere and we're part of it.
mm.
Um, and there was the book, The Cosmic Serpent, tells a story of how, I mean, I'm a reductionist rationalist, despite, I reduced the whole thing to one question. What does it mean that these people whose knowledge about their plants as widely recognized by science and pillaged and so forth. What does it mean that they say that their knowledge comes from this irrational, mysterious, hallucinogenic source, and that in this source, serpents play a big role, and that when they come out of the ayahuasca experience and then they elaborate in their stories, in their mythologies, in their cosmologies, serpents and twin beings are there and vines that extend up to the sky and
Mm.
all of these elements that actually are common around the world. If you look at what Joseph Campbell wrote, I mean he's really the guy to go
Mm.
if you want to look into this. He wrote those four books. With the first tome is Primitive Mythology.
Mhm.
So it's all about, I mean, serpent twin beings creating life in Australia, in
Mm.
Asia, in South America. And that itself is a very mysterious question. It's like, how is it that there's like 6,000 different languages in this world now? 5,000 of which are indigenous languages. So there's like an enormous
Ah,
cultural
yeah.
variety on 5 continents. And yet there are these fundamental similarities
Mhm.
in, well, the stories people tell themselves about life.
Mm. I went back as the brothers did, Jeremy, and listened to our first conversation. And I just want to share a few nuggets with you to push on this notion of reductionist and
Okay.
rationalist. And maybe we can consider that from both kind of a Western Judeo-Christian and a Western scientific two lenses there. You said in our previous conversation, when you came out of your first ayahuasca adventure, the next morning you were down by the river and you picked up a leaf from a tree and you said this, the veins of the leaf felt the same as the veins of my hand. You did this superimposition of leaf and hand. And you said, I felt reconciled to nature for the first time in my life. We humans, you said, have real life kinship with every other living thing on earth. There is, you said, second, there's a unity, you suggested, a unity flowing underneath the surface of diversity. We ended our conversation as you end the Cosmic Serpent with this wisdom requires, among other things, wisdom requires contemplation of the mystery. And then finally, the snake form. You just spoke about the cosmic serpent. They're twinned. They have these mythological, perhaps extraterrestrial origins, which we should come back to. And you said human intuition, going back thousands of years, senses that snake form, serpent form is essential to life. And that's just an amalgam of sort of the brothers and I reflecting on our first conversation, just to and maybe pique our audience's interest to go back and listen or re-listen, rewatch that remarkable conversation. Can you speak to the relationship between, and I'm going to hold up another one of your books. We haven't talked about this book yet, but this is a book called Shamans Through Time, which you co-edited. The relationship between shamans and the Judeo-Christian tradition. In the beginning, says the book of Genesis, was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was in God, and on it goes. How it, how do you understand kind of this ancient focus on twinned serpents in the context of kind of what we've come up with in the West? Is that even possible?
Is what even possible?
What's the relationship, if any?
Oh, um,
there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm rolling up my sleeves here.
Good. That may help.
Uh, let's see. I always think that I mean if I'm gonna listen to anybody answering a question about religion, I mean the first thing I want is for that person to situate themselves. So
Mm,
I'll situate myself. Um, I was raised Anglican by my mother. My father was an atheist. I was educated by Catholic Jesuits. Um,
mm,
I have become an agnostic. An agnostic means that I know that I don't know about final causes.
mm,
Um, I mean, my basic point of view is that when one has a brain not much bigger than a soccer ball, um, how can one claim to have certitudes about the entire cosmos? Um, it's a humble perspective. Um, but I'm not saying that people who believe in whatever religion or that they're wrong or that they're misguided. I'm just saying that I don't know. Um, I'm actually not that interested in believing. I'm much more interested in knowing. I know that it's not possible to escape having basic beliefs. You have to believe that you have a body if you want to sort of stand up and walk across the room. You have to be, there are certain things about reality that you have to subscribe to, otherwise it makes existing kind of different. So nobody is without a priori beliefs about the world. So I'm not
mm.
claiming that I don't have beliefs,
Yeah.
but beliefs in God with capital G or what have you. Um, it's just not my business.
Mm,
That said, far be it from me to want to kind of walk on other people's gardens and tell them how to think and interpret things.
yeah.
But I do respect all religions, and including the Judeo-Christian one that I kind of came out of, and so forth, the whole tradition. All that having been said, I think that what has become clear, at least for me, when you look at the Bible, the first of all, the Judeo tradition, the Old Testament for the Christians, was started to be written 3,000 years ago. And when you look, as certain anthropologists have, at the origin of, that book kind of came out of the blue. There was nothing about except the people who were raising, they were shepherds and had their cattle, and then suddenly, bing, there was this book, and it had commandments in it, and all these texts and stories about how the world came into existence and all that. But if you look at it, um, well, first of all, I think that what's important to see is that during the last, let's say, 10,000 years, so 7,000 years before the text was written, and then leading up to the moment, the 7,000 years from minus 10,000 to minus 3,000 years ago, what you had in the Middle East is a configuration that you didn't have in other places, which is domestication of plants and domestication of animals.
Mm,
Um, in South America, you had a lot of domestication of plants, but next to no domestication of animals. To this day, Amazonian people hardly raise, well, chickens now and stuff, but traditionally, you'd go fishing, you'd go hunting. You might have a monkey hanging around the house for pleasure, but there was no ox, sheep, goats, none of this. Um, there were people who herded cattle in Africa, but they were nomads. The Chinese had domesticated plants and they had pigs, but actually having pigs didn't really change their way of living with the plants, cultivating the plants and the way they lived.
Mm.
In the Middle East, by domesticating cereals, the wheat and so forth, and at the same time herding large animals, cows. What this did was sedentarize. It also meant that people then you have to enclose your cattle. You've got to sort of look over them. The world of the barn is what anthropologists have called it. So suddenly you have, well, humans literally living above their animals,
Yes.
um, in very close quarters with them. And this actually had impact in terms of like illnesses and, the European people who kind of came out of this were had much greater resistance to
Mm.
certain germs because of their proximity with these domesticated animals. But that's a sidetrack. It would later play out in the Americas when they came and they spread their illnesses, and it had a large effect on indigenous populations. But getting back to the barn, what occurred at that point, several things occurred. One was a need in these people's minds to take a distance from those animals. They were so close to them that they had to think of themselves as somehow apart from them.
Ah.
And so, yes, this idea that humans are somehow above all the plants, all the animals, and that they kind of control them. We've domesticated plants, we've domesticated animals, we control them, we're on top of them, and we're above them. Meanwhile, these were all people, it would seem, whose, well, they had been nomads. So this is a progressive sedentarization. The prehistorical evidence that one has for what these kinds of people believed in was more of a goddess religion, more of an animistic kind of religion. Um, but as as the control grew on, and another element came in, which is men are privileged over women in terms of physical strength when you have to control cattle.
Mm.
And so controlling cattle, and cattle, by the way, is the word that gives capital, you know, a capital, as in capitalism. Capital is the Latin for head of cattle.
Mm.
How much capital do you have? How many heads of cattle do you have? It's the same question.
Mm.
Controlling cattle, um, well, men control cattle better than women do because they're stronger. They have 15 to 20% more body mass. So I hope you're seeing where I'm going. Um, we're heading towards patriarchy.
Mhm.
So what occurs in the Middle East with the domestication of plants and animals at the same time that it embodies itself in the world of the barn is humans placing themselves above the rest of nature, men placing themselves above women. And so in all these places, the creation stories had been about serpents and twin beings and men and women together, actually women before men, because life comes out of women.
Mm.
So all this was brewing, let's say, from -10 to -3,
Yeah.
and kind of transforming. And then, bing, you get the Bible. So, I mean, what's beautiful about it is that it's a text. You can look at it. I mean, that's the difference between prehistory and history is that with history, you look at texts. It's a definition. If you don't have text, then it's prehistory.
Yeah.
So we can look at this text. You can just look at the Ten Commandments. They are rules for exactly the kind of people I just described.
Hmm.
In other words, um, there's social hierarchy. There's people who have more capital or more cattle than others. There are people who have servants. So, what do you do if you steal somebody's servant? What do you do if you steal somebody's cattle? The Ten Commandments are rules for people who have already set up shop in this sedentarized, patriarchal, uh, hierarchical fashion. Now we look at the first chapter of that book, and this is not me talking or analyzing. This is actually what Joseph Campbell says.
Mm.
Um, he says, well, there's a striking patriarchal inversion. And what that means is that for thousands of years before this, women and men together with women before men, goddess oriented, and serpent, symbol of life and knowledge and healing, widespread everywhere. And then suddenly, this uh, new monotheistic
Mm.
religion appears. And it is just as humans are above animals, and just as men are above women. Actually, there's one God, not a whole bunch of them. It's not a goddess. It's one God. Not a terrestrial God, but an extraterrestrial one. So a unique, all-powerful,
Mm.
extraterrestrial, masculine God. Well, this was a completely new concept. No one had ever had a God like this before. I mean, there had never been a single God, certainly not a masculine God. And then, you want patriarchal inversions. This is like the only story in the world, I think, where a woman comes out of a man. Adam's rib. God took some clay, created Adam, man first,
Mm.
and then, oh, I'll give Adam a companion here. Take a rib out and finger make the woman out of the male. Okay, so that's number one patriarchal inversion. Number two is that, well, and the story itself associates Eve and the serpent. So in other words, this Johnny come lately text or religion. No, it's an early text, but it's a Johnny come lately religion because it's speaking to at least 5,000 years of goddess religions or ways of understanding the world, and it turns them around. So, earthly goddesses forget it, importance of the female, forget it, and oh, the serpent. Oh, yes. Well, instead of being an agent of healing, of life, and of wisdom, um, this serpent is going to play the role of the agent of evil.
Mm.
But there's something actually pretty inconsistent in that story, and I mean, and everybody's can read the um first chapter of Genesis. It's easy; just open the book and start reading it. Um, the serpent, according just to the telling of the biblical telling of the story, the serpent tells Eve, "There's this tree over there, and it has these fruit, and if you eat those fruit, it'll open your eyes, and you will see like God sees." And she says, "No, you must be putting me on." And he said, "No." So she tries it, and in fact, he didn't lie to her. It's true. I mean, according to the telling of the story, she ate the fruit and it opened her eyes. And then she had Adam come over. He tried it too. And then God came down and said, "Ah, you've eaten the fruit. I'm going to punish you, the woman. I'm going to punish you. You're going to suffer in childbirth from now on. You must have been listening to that serpent. That serpent is evil. That serpent is a liar. We're going to define him and he's going to have to crawl in the dust the rest of his life and so forth." Except the serpent didn't lie. The serpent said, "If you eat this fruit, you'll have your open eye." Well, he ate the fruit and it had open. Where the serpent lied is just not clear in the story. What is clear is that every single element of all the hundreds of creation stories that had been told previously have been turned around in this one single story.
Mhm.
The tree in the middle of the garden is the axis mundi, the tree of knowledge. It's you have the it you so twin beings, by the way, Adam and Eve. So you have all these elements that you can find in the cosmologies the world around the world of serpent, twin beings, axis mundi, tree of knowledge. Except it's all turned upside down. Um, well, okay. So there it is. The uh, patriarchal fellows who wrote the book. So they'd actually been coming out of all these thousands of years of refining their sedentarized the hierarchy, patriarchy. Inequality between people, and so that you have, some people with more cattle, some people with less, and then rules, and that is the beginning of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so here we are, 3,000 years later, we're still kind of sitting in it.
Mm. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Can you say a little bit more? That was remarkable, by the way. I am quite familiar with the story of Genesis, as many are, and the way you just explicated that was really fascinating. I want to hold this book up again, Shamans Through Time, because the subtitle of your book is 500 Years on the Path to Knowledge. And you said something a few minutes ago, the differences between belief and knowledge. And I've been working my way through the Jeremy Narby canon, and you do like the word knowledge.
Mm.
Can you maybe speak to knowledge and bring it back to maybe the shaman's way versus what you just described?
Well, I'll give you a kind of a left field answer on this one.
Okay.
Because knowledge is obviously central. It's also can be hard to define. People have different understandings, but one aspect that I really like is in the old days before GPS and the Uber and all this in London, the taxi drivers.
Mm.
To become a London taxi driver, you had to study the knowledge. The knowledge was memorizing every single street, lane, and square in London. So that when somebody gets into your cab and says, "I want to go to Lily Pond Lane in NW2," "Yes, madam," and off we go. And you know where it is. Because, and so finally, it's a very good um, image for what is knowledge. I mean, it's not just information. It's verified information. And if you don't have it, you're not going to get to Lily Pond Lane. Y- Um, you know, so it's something that even though it can be hard, what's the difference between, a rumor and information and then knowledge
Mm.
and what's the difference in knowledge and wisdom and so forth? All these things can be debated. But it's also fairly simple. Um, if you're in the Amazon, the knowledge is about plants. So if you have a wound and you might want to help it heal, Well, some plants will actually help it heal faster.
Mm,
Other plants will do the opposite.
mm,
You want to know the difference. You know, if you're just saying, oh, well, I'm not sure, but maybe we can just put this plant on it. You know, that's not knowledge. Uh, that's sort of trial and error. Um, it can be a way to get knowledge, but knowledge is once you've done the trial and error, once you've had a bunch of experiences, once you've accumulated, then finally you know which plant to eat, which plant to use for that, how to go over there. So, you know, that is knowledge. It's not just, oh, I believe I can get to by going. It's, you know, you can believe a whole bunch of things, but do you really know how to
mm,
go there? Well, if you've been there a whole bunch of times, you probably do.
mm,
Um, or maybe you're just really good at reading books and studying it theoretically. Maybe you've never been there, but you've read so many books about going there that you actually do know. So knowledge is not only confined to experience, but you know, I think experience-based knowledge is really the important way to go. Um, you know, like people who talk about ayahuasca but who have never had ayahuasca, you know, it's a little bit complicated. But that doesn't mean that people who have had a lot of ayahuasca necessarily know what they're talking about either. Um, you know, so that uh, there's no single recipe for getting knowledge. Still, I think it's the name of the game.
It strikes me too, Jeremy, that true knowledge, let's say, has place embedded in it, or an understanding of place, um, and the life in that place. There's a wonderful anthropologist, you probably know his work, Ken Basso,
Hmm.
who worked with the Apache,
Hmm.
and the title of his book is so beautiful, Wisdom Sits in Places. And I read that book as an undergraduate, and just it just opened my
Hmm.
mind. And it seems to me that what you're describing here in part is, if we're going to take knowledge and turn it into wisdom, we're going to contemplate the mystery. A really central, if not the central call there is to superimpose the leaf over our hand and marvel in this place we call the Amazon, or the desert, or Earth, or whatever we call it.
So
Mar
we're
marvel
moving.
at the unity. Yeah.
We're moving towards wisdom and kind of away from knowledge. Is
Well,
that
I
where
don't
you're?
know.
Uh-huh.
What's your take on that?
My take on the
Knowledge.
connection between knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you know, it's funny because I've been so concentrated on knowledge recently that I haven't been thinking about wisdom that much. But maybe that's also a form of wisdom.
Hmm.
Um, Uh, wisdom is a hard one to talk about. Um, if only because if you claim to have it, it's kind of pretentious. It's a lot easier to claim not to have it.
Mm.
Uh, you know, but then one can, of course, admire the wisdom of other people or traditions of wisdom. I think it's necessarily something like your knowledge has deepened to such a point, and but also knowledge and self-knowledge. So,
Mm.
you know, you get to know about the world and different religions, you travel, you read books, you study, you learn about blades of grass, trees, societies, other cultures, linguistic differences, the cosmos, conditions on Mars. You get interested in everything. You accumulate. You start accumulating factoids, information. You devour stuff, and finally you end up knowing a few things. So you're not, and then your knowledge grows. And I think you get to a point also where you also realize your own limits, and that probably, you know, so I think to have wisdom, you have to have a lot of knowledge. You
Is
also have to have a lot of self-knowledge and to know the limits of your own knowledge. And then suddenly you can see more clearly, and with some kind of detachment of like,
mm,
ah, yes, well, yes, well, that's so then if somebody comes and a young person comes and, oh, this is so hard, I'm experiencing all these troubles, and there you are, you say, ah, well, that's life, isn't it?
yeah.
And you can say that's life. It's not so much because you become this really wise person, but I mean, you've seen the film a whole bunch of times. You lived it when you were young. You've seen other people through, and this is how it is. Well, when you're 23, this is the kind of, it's the first time you get a job, and then it gets really, and then the person you're working for is really difficult, and you come home and you're really tired. Well, yeah, well, that's life, right? Um,
It, it,
so I think that wisdom kind of develops in that way.
yeah, it's funny. My brain just did this linguistic trick. You said a few minutes ago, Jeremy, that the difference between wisdom and knowledge, that's a hard one.
Mhm.
And my brain just went, well, maybe what wisdom is hard-won knowledge.
Hard won.
Hard one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, can we come around to
Good.
science? Specifically, this notion of DNA and the
Mm,
relationship between the discovery of DNA in 1953 by
mm,
Watson and Crick and the twinned serpents. Um, there's a phrase you're familiar with, I'm sure, called junk DNA. Um, and Francis Crick suggested after this discovery that DNA perhaps could not have actually evolved on Earth, but maybe evolved somewhere else. And that brings us around to this question of extraterrestrial twin serpents versus
mhm.
here on Earth. What do you make of all that?
Well, uh, it's fairly easy for anybody who would be really interested in this to just check what Francis Crick himself wrote. He wrote a book called Life Itself. Um, and the thing about Crick is that he had an admirable rational brain. I mean, a head for numbers for one. And once he had understood what the DNA system that is basically identical in every single living being, from the tiniest microbe to the longest whale. Um, so DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, it is this double helix shaped molecule. Um, uh, but it is actually two strands wrapped around one another. And the strands are connected by these adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, these amino acids that are complementary, so that G can only be with C and T can only be with A, or vice versa. So with these four, and so they function like letters or like in a coding system. So there are 4 times 4 times 4, 64 possible three-letter words in this coding system, which is the genetic code that Crick also co-discovered. And they correspond to of these, each one of the 64 three-letter words in DNA letters correspond to one of 20 amino acids used to build proteins. Proteins are the bricks of every single cell of every living being. A blade of grass, you and me, are made of cells. Our cells are made of proteins. Our proteins are made of amino acids. Amino acids, so they're these substances, they get strung together. A protein is like, on average, 200 amino acids strung together, like pearls on a necklace. And what counts is the ordering of the pearls,
Mm,
and that changes and also the identity of the pearls,
mm,
and that changes how the protein will then fall to all these different proteins. You can make an infinite number of proteins and shape because when you have the combinatorials of the all the different amino acids and all the different orders that you can combine. So this is a complex coding system. Um, Crick looked at so it's not just the DNA molecule and the four letters. It's that they inseparably go together because a device that can read the DNA molecule and turn that information into amino acids and proteins, the device is itself a protein.
mm,
Um, so the chances of, so if you just getting back to the genetic code, there's also something strange about it, is that you have 64 possible words in 3 DNA letters, and they designate 20 possible amino acids. So there's overlap. Several, for one amino acid, there can be several DNA words. 64 words, 20 amino acids. But 3 of the 64 DNA words do not correspond to an amino acid. They correspond to stop, start. So when a transcription enzyme gloms onto the DNA strand that has been previously separated out. So the double strand is separated, and then the transcription enzyme reads the single strand and starts, and so does 3 letters, 1 amino acid, 3 more letters, another amino acid, 3 more letters, amino acid. And so it produces this line of pearls of proteins. Um, and then if it gets to the 3 DNA words, it means stop. It stops.
mm,
And then it'll continue. And then if it says start, it'll restart.
mm.
And so this is actually going on all the time in our cells, actually right now, and has been for 4 billion years, or 3.8 billion years. This is what biologists say. So Crick started thinking about it, said, okay, now wait a second. This seems to be because this is the genetic code that works just in this fashion. The DNA molecules and the proteins in their infinite complexity are a prerequisite for what we know as life.
Mm.
How could such a complex system emerge in such a short time? Such a short time means that the Earth seems to have been still kind of like covered in molten lava about 4 billion years ago. And then seemingly almost as soon as life would have been possible 3.9 billion years ago, bim, there are life forms.
Mm.
And the simplest bacteria has this highly complex genetic code, DNA, protein system. I mean, a bacterium is made of proteins. It's one cell, but so it's a unicellular, but the bacterial cell is made of the same proteins, the same amino acids, the same DNA coding system that
Mm.
you and I are made of today.
Mm.
So, I'm not a mathematician like Crick, but and he explains the unfathomable complexity that if you think that it's hard to imagine that for no reason and in a relatively small window of time, such complexity. He said like the chances there's less than one chance in, and I think it's 10 to the 74th, and 10 to the 74th is like a larger number than all the atoms in the cosmos.
Hmm.
You know the story of the chessboard where the king plays against this wanderer, and the wanderer beats the king, and the king says, "Oh well, I will compensate you. I'll give you. So what would you like?" And the guy says, "Oh well, all I want is a grain of rice on square one, two on square two, four on square three, etc." Okay, says the king. But actually, by the time you get to square 32, you're already sort of beyond the grains of rice that you could produce, on the planet. So I think the king in the story had him hung for being a
For being a better mathematician,
uh-huh.
a more clever
Um,
mathematician than the king.
in other words, if you're going to
Yeah,
go up, when you're talking about 10 to the 74th in
yeah.
complexity,
It's
it's just
yeah.
like unimaginable.
Well, so
So
let go ahead.
so then that's why Crick said, well, look, the only solution that seems reasonable is that the system, the living system of the biological system of cellular life with proteins and DNA um, took form elsewhere.
Mm. To piggyback on that story, Michael Harner was an anthropologist in the 60s, yes, who was one of the first to ingest ayahuasca. And he says, um, had a vision of extraterrestrial life forms that, well, you tell the story because it seems like it's a nice build
Yeah.
from Crick's puzzlement. What was Harner's experience?
Well, it's also one of these long stories, and his version is probably the one to consult. But um, it's true that he had this really intense ayahuasca experience, and in it, well, first of all, he thought he was dead, and then there were these beings, and they were
Mm.
reptilian beings, and they started showing him how life had taken form on the planet. So he says he saw this film of the planet before life existed, and then these serpent-shaped beings coming out of the cosmos. The film that he saw explained that they were fleeing and that they had come to hide. And they hid by transforming themselves into all kinds of living earthly beings. And that they are made themselves invisible by miniaturizing themselves down to a microscopic level inside these beings. And that these beings then transformed themselves into the multiple species that currently inhabit the earth. And Harner had never thought of anything. I mean, it's a pretty hair-raising scenario when you are shown a film by reptilians and you actually learn that you and all the people and all the living beings you know are filled with miniature serpents that descend from extraterrestrial serpents that are billions of years old and that have been in hiding for quite a long time. And so then Harner says that once he had that extraordinary experience. The next day, he was still kind of grasping for words, and he he went to see an old shaman who happened to be blind, but and so he told him excitedly about the story and about what these beings had said to him, and the shaman said, "Oh, they're always saying that."
Did the Ashaninka or other groups that you have worked with share that notion that these extraterrestrial creatures bake themselves into DNA to hide and then, or what's
Well,
the
that's an interesting question because uh, it turns out that and the source that I would look at, there's this Lawrence Sullivan taught history of religion at Harvard, I think. He wrote this book called Ikanchu's Drum,
mm,
and it surveys. It's 1,000-page book, and it surveys all the different shamanic traditions in South America. Um, and what he points out, and I can confirm this at least from the small perspective of the people that I lived with, many South American people are not all that interested in absolute origins. In other words, um, yeah, they'll have creation stories. So, it starts when the cosmic serpent arrives. So you have these stories. The beginning, episode one, chapter one. This cosmic serpent gets to the earth, and all these beings spill out of it. It's the anaconda canoe, the cosmic anaconda canoe.
mm.
And these snake people emerge out of the snake canoe, and then they start transforming themselves, and so on and so forth. But the question, so where did this serpent come from? Who knows?
Mm.
I don't know. Why do you ask? Um, that we've got other fish to fry. We're trying to survive. We're interested in finding a remedy to heal the grandmothers, whatever. You know, these questions like, so where did the
Yeah.
cosmic canoe anaconda come from? You've got to be. I mean, this is like but there are a few indigenous groups that have that interest, and a few individual shamans over time who have that interest. So um, I think that the old blind shaman that Harner spoke with had been interested in that question. Given that, I'll give you, this will explain maybe a little bit why I kind of, because, well, you'll see. Um, I actually pursued when I was looking into doing the whole Cosmic Serpent investigation. I started taking all of this seriously, and so I wanted to know. Okay, and I was so let's just say that what Harner experienced has something to do with what might actually have occurred at some point.
Mm.
So what do other people say about, even though only a small number of Amazonian people talk about absolute origins, what do they say? Well, here it gets a little bit hairy because what they say, what comes up regularly, even if it's infrequent, is that the other world from which these cosmic serpents came, are inhabited by what they call people without anus. Do you think what? And this is in anthropological literature. I'm not making this up, right?
Hmm.
So you're the people without anus. What it means is, it means, well, first of all, they don't defecate because they don't have an anus, but actually it actually means they're immortal. It means that They use 100% of what they consume for energy. They don't need, they're not, like if you go back to Genesis, God made Adam with clay. You actually get this, you get this in indigenous stories as well. And so the cosmic serpent, those beings that came that created life, they created life with what was available here. And what was available here was mortal stuff. So we're made a mix of the cosmic advanced technology, immortal thing. Actually, DNA is a pretty advanced technology, and we can get to that in just a second. I think it's also an interesting clue. Um, but because we combine the immortal cosmic with the terrestrial mortal, well, we end up dying, and that's it. And that meanwhile, we're not immortal, so that we do need to ingest stuff, and then we can't use it all, and so then we also defecate. But if you're an immortal, you don't need an anus. And this is what is so at first when you read these Amazonian myths, you're thinking this is a little bit strange. It's a little bit impolite. I'm not going to be able to talk to my mother about this.
Mom, guess what?
Uh-huh.
Mom, guess what? Yeah.
Mom. I
Yeah.
mean, anyway. So yeah, I know that we're sort of reaching the end of time here, but I'll just allow me to sneak away from the people without anus, um, and just talk about the DNA molecule as
Please.
it turns out that the molecule itself is so it's not just a text. So yes, it is a chemical, deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a molecule, but it is also a kind of text. It encodes information.
Mm,
That's clearly what it does. So it's
mm,
it's it's not just a substance. It's also like a text.
mm,
But it is so miniaturized that not only is it smaller than the smallest wavelength of visible light, so it actually is technically invisible in terms of what we mean by being visible. It's smaller than the smallest wavelength of light that we can see. We see with wavelengths of light. We see wavelengths of light. This is way smaller than a wavelength of light, so it can't be seen with light. It is so small that it's 10 atoms wide. I've been told by a Swiss physicist that if it were 8 atoms wide, it would not be capable of duplication.
mm,
Because what it is, it's an information coding and duplication device. So that because it is two complementary strands wrapped around each other, they can be separated and then duplicated. So it's an information storage device capable of self-duplication that could not be smaller and still function in the material world. In other words, um, now we ourselves are moving towards nano, towards miniaturizing and going down to this level. And when you go down to this level, well, many more things are possible. Everything goes faster. Uh, um, this is the most sophisticated technology that we can imagine, and that is still physical. That really is what a DNA molecule is. And this is what jump-started life 3.9 billion years ago as soon as it was possible. So if you just look at it, you think, well, Okay, maybe this sort of just Crick says to think that such a molecule could have uh, jumped together from a whole chaotic bunch of an atomic soup is like thinking that a jumbo jet could, that a storm could hit a junkyard, and that what would result of all the pieces of metal and rubber flying around would be boom, a jumbo jet ready to fly. It's obviously nonsense. The problem with Crick's idea, the problem with all of this is like, so, okay, what is beyond, what is beyond? Even the problem with what happened 4 billion years ago on Earth, just that question before what is beyond, is like, it's not verifiable.
Mm,
100 million scenarii are possible, none of them verifiable.
mm,
So a lot of people, there are a lot of ideas about how life could have started in this it could have been an RNA world, and it could have been like this, and it could have been like that. But actually, for the moment, it's kind of out of reach. What actually happened 3.9 billion years ago, we'd like to know, but at the moment, we probably can't know,
mm.
you know? Um, so that's one thing. That's why I think that wisdom is also just contemplating the mystery instead of like rushing into believing, oh, I want to believe that it was an RNA world, or I want to believe that it came on a cosmic anaconda, or I want to believe that it took form for no reason, or I want to believe that God did it. Um, everybody's welcome to believe what they want. Personally, I think it's quite okay to sit there and think, well, you know what? We don't know for the moment. There are lots of different possibilities, but just that we don't know. And meanwhile, even though it seems rather likely that the jumbo jet did not take form in a junkyard when a storm hit, but that it probably came from somewhere where they already knew how to make jumbo jets. When you have this hyper sophisticated information storage device like DNA, yeah, it seems probably likely that it must have come somewhere where I don't know I don't know, maybe they were immortal, maybe they did not have anuses, maybe they knew how to do this stuff. Who knows? Um, you know, and it's also the beauty is like what a mysterious world we live in. What a cosmos. Who knows what's out there? Um, so that's I think we've covered the whole thing.
Jeremy Narby, unbelievable conversation. I have more questions, but we'll save them for what I hope will be our next conversation.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll leave you with this because you asked me in your email, so what have I discovered since that might either contradict or confirm and so on. The like this thing about the people without anus and the
Mm,
all of that stuff, the extraterrestrial part of the story preceding life and so on. It was so outlandish that I kind of left it out. There's no people without anus in the Cosmic Serpent.
mhm,
It's just too like you back in those days, 25 years ago, they're talking about that stuff. Even now, it's a little bit of a tall order.
mm,
Um, so there's all kinds of elements in the story that concerns cosmic serpents,
mm,
DNA,
mm.
Francis Crick, all of that stuff is like it's just been there suspended, you know, um, uh, because I don't think I mean, when people are interested and people ask questions, then I think it's perfectly fine to talk about it. But I've been spending my time working on stuff that I don't know, people around me, people in the world today can understand and are interested in. Um, like concrete things about plants, about the Amazon, about, what can we do about how should we think about plants and what is the place of humans in the biosphere? These are like concrete, palpable, verifiable questions that I think are important. Um, And so that's also, it's not that I haven't learned anything about this stuff. It's more that I've been, keeping it on the back burner, let's say.
You've been doing all this work enveloped in the mystery.
Yeah,
Yeah. And maybe at the end of the day, Jeremy, that's all any of us can do.
that sounds like wisdom, Rob.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and
Okay.
really look forward to our next conversation. And the book, of course, is The Cosmic Serpent. You've written so many other fantastic books as well, and I understand you're currently at work on a new project. You wanted to say a word about that?
Um, yeah, let's see. No,
Well, let's save it. We'll save it.
no.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Jeremy Narby, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Yes, we'll talk again soon.
All right.
Thanks.
A
Thanks to
pleasure.
Ian and Michael and Philip Baldwin, of course, and the Marion Institute as well.
Yes, thanks to the Baldwin brothers.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Ciao,
Be well.
ciao.
Ciao. Welcome to the requesting room. I'm here with the three Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip Baldwin. Gentlemen, Jeremy
Hello.
Narby, part deux. What a what a ride.
Oh yeah.
Michael, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure, sure. One of the best, I thought. One of the best. It so surprises me that he had so much to cover that I didn't sort of anticipate he would really be able to cover. But anyway, for me, I was totally riveted by the way in which patriarchy began, which I think is a huge topic for the three brothers and the quest. And the thing I'm not 100% sure about is that, of course, you go 10,000 years ago. Then I think you get to 7,000 years ago. And then I think you get to 3,000 years ago. And I'm assuming that between, well, let's say up until 7,000 years ago, and maybe drifting into more currently, you had a goddess kind of environment, animist, goddess oriented. And what I had no idea about this whole thing around animal husbandry, I mean, taking care of goats and cattle. And of course, I love cattle being capital. Exactly the same thing. How many cattle do you have is capital. Um, so, goats and cattle and sheep and herding and containing them and building a barn for them and living over them in the barn so that it actually, I think, is called something like the barn theory or something like that. And and then you have this obvious evidence that it's the male who is caring for these animals, not the female, because the male has more muscle, more heft, and it's a more difficult job. And then you have them living above the animals below, and you get in. I love sedentaryism, and so up comes patriarchy, domination. And in 3000, you get suddenly out of the blue what he calls, I guess, the first text. I don't know if it's the first text, but it is a significant text. But wait a minute, before I go there, it's very important to point out that this is a Middle East phenomenon, herding these types of animals. Didn't happen in South America. South America was all plant oriented, and then you hunt. China and all was all plant oriented. Yes, they had pigs, but it was a different thing. So you have this one place where you've got this phenomenon of herding and caring for these different types of animals like sheep, goats, and cattle. And then you get, boom, this Old Testament and the creation of this God who is singular and definitely male. And you start to get into rules and regs. don't, if you're going to steal my cow, you're going to have to be punished, or if you're going to whatever. And so that's really sort of it. And I just would love to welcome the brothers to correct me, comment on me, fill in somewhat what I felt was a very interesting point of the conversation, of the interview.
The only thing I would say, Mikey, that was a good recap. It helped me. Is the timeline. I think it's not BP, before present. I think it's BCE, or as they say today, before CE. In other words, 5,000 years ago, the patriarchal system arose.
Yeah.
Not 3,000 years
Yeah,
ago.
okay.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
and then of course isn't it Abel and Cain, the two brothers? And one is in charge of the crops and the other is a herder.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an old, or at least by 5,000 years ago, it's an old psychodrama.
And
Right.
how the Cosmic Serpent morphs into essentially an emissary of evil in the garden. I love that part. And Michael, when you do this with your hands, I feel like I'm in the barn. So thank you for that. That was like, oh yeah, that's it.
Well, I think that was one of several really fabulous hits. I'll let the brothers handle some of the others, or one of the others. Philly?
Well, sort of, we could go on about what all those things Michael raised. I do feel that there were elements of what Jeremy had to say that were particularly pointed and remarkable for me, reiterating what Michael said about the cattle and capital. Those little anecdotes are powerful. That little image, I won't forget that little idea.
No.
The other one coming towards the end of the conversation was the analogy about the jumbo jet, apropos of the whole conversation around DNA. And the idea, well, of a storm coming in and going brah, and all the pieces go up in the air and it assembles into a jumbo jet overnight, as an analogy for the absurdity of thinking that 3.9 billion years ago, bing, fully formed DNA, ta-da, as if magic. I don't understand why there is such a deep aversion to the idea of interspatial transfer of information, species, biology, chemistry. Why does the scientific community have such a visceral negative approach to this, especially when you've got two of the most famous scientists in the 20th century who espouse it, Crick and then the astronomer, not Hubble.
Watson.
Hoyle.
Oh.
Exactly.
Hoyle.
He said roughly the same thing. And yet, they got away with it because they're profoundly prestigious, but it's a curious thing. If you mention something like transpermia, you're going to be laughed out of the room by 99.99% of people.
Well, don't you think part of the problem, Philip, is that when you're going into this outside interference thing, you're going into a realm of inability to prove, which science hates?
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's like quantum mechanics. So many scientists can't stand it or avoid it or don't face it or don't teach it because it becomes for them sort of woo-woo.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I think it's overpowering. I thought Jeremy did an incredible job, and I still didn't get it all with the proteins and everything else. But when he does the the number of atoms, you sort of go, how could you possibly think this was an instant gratification moment?
A great deal of science, I've been taught by a scientist, has to do with asking the right questions and not falling for any answer, but being supremely critical throughout. A theory of rationality that certainly originated with the Greeks. And a great deal of it is not, well, let's go into our laboratories and prove it. It's in the mind. It's the mind working to ascertain things. So what Philip is talking about, and which both Jeremy and actually others, Graham Hancock, at 8 atoms wide, you cannot encode information. At 10, you can. And something did that. And so if you look at the discussion that, both that Jeremy provided, and you consider all the facts, well, prove the theory wrong. You don't have to go out and do experiments. Just prove it wrong logically.
Another element of this that I thought was very interesting in his remarks was this notion of apparently most Aboriginal people around the world aren't really interested in absolute origins.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is a reflection on us. We want to know. We have to know. We don't like mystery. We want to put the bricks in and see the house and close the door on it. And but the idea that he goes to the shave, Harner there, he goes to the shave, and the next thing, oh yeah, they always say that. I thought that was great, and
yeah,
we need more of that. I think.
I love that.
Of course, that too is anathema to science.
Yeah, that was news to me, and I loved it because earlier in reading Graham and other people, I thought, okay, push the problem beyond Earth, push it out into space. You still got the same problem. And I completely concur with the majority of shamans. It's the cosmic serpent. We don't care where it came from. That is not a pressing problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was reminded too of Narby spoke to this in the first interview too, the idea of theory that Westerners bring to the jungle, teoria in Spanish or Portuguese or however it's translated. The indigenous people equate to essentially bullshit. It's like, does the theory bear out? And if not, it's of so little use. Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Well, any other reflections on our second conversation? Yeah, Phil.
Well, one detail that keeps coming back to me is, of course, Jeremy did a long run there explaining about what it says in the Bible and the Adam and Eve story and so on. Well, tick, 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 back 2, 3, 4 interviews, whatever it is, with Mario Biglino. I'd like to get those two boys in the same room.
Yeah.
Because what is this Bible stuff? It did come in rather quickly, in fact, at least as a written phenomenon. Bingo, it arrived. And that also tends to confirm the Biglino take on the meaning of that story. I don't think it contradicts really anything that Jeremy is saying. It's kind of parallel to it. But listening to you guys talk, I wanted to raise my hand and say, hey, have you heard of this guy, Barry Biglino? I mean, at some point, it would be great to bring some of these thinkers into the same conversation.
Yeah, agree. Have we said everything about patriarchy? I mean, it is a big theme for us. And how did it arise? And so, yes, Jeremy did provide really, to me anyway, original speculation. Is there more to say about it?
Oh, sorry. I was remembering, as Jeremy was describing patriarchy, another thinker who I wish was still with us. You probably know Paul Shepard.
Yes.
And he wrote
a
number of remarkable books, but I'm thinking of Nature and Madness.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually did such a remarkable job in his own work about showing how, Michael, to your point, the culture of cattle raising, pastoralism, kind of served as a bridge to patriarchy from the plant-based wildness, quote unquote, of the indigenous peoples who lived everywhere across this earth to several thousand years ago now. And the way that Jeremy put all that together, Michael, I thought your summary of patriarchy was amazing.
Well, I also think that, Anne Baring is very good on the Deuteronomists and how they concocted that text with those rules and regs. And it would be sort of, always interesting to talk to Anne Baring, with that famous book, how the what knowledge, what information is there about the Deuteronomists and their motivation to come together, sort of almost, I gather, a bit like a sudden event and create this extraordinary book of rules and regs.
Mm-hmm. And
I also think that just as sort of Mauro and the Crick piece and others, open up a bit of a Pandora's box for us brothers and Rob. I mean, that Biglino is an incredible hot potato or elephant in the room when you think about the viability of it and everything, or the credibility of it all. I do believe, whereas at the beginning, I'm not sure, at least for myself, we were going to go into the direction of outside interference or concepts like transpermia or manipulation. And obviously, we're going to pursue this subject, even though you may end up having to say, we don't care where the serpent comes from. We accept it's a mystery, which is, I think, what we do. But still in all, it's fun to do the exploration on that maybe crazy topic.
Well, there's so much mystery in it because the 3% of their technology of DNA, if you accept the premise, which at this point I think I do, is the revolution that's happened in the West called molecular biology. 3% are the genes, and let's decode all of that and then manipulate it ourselves. But the other 97% is unknown.
Yep.
And called junk.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can communicate with that buried treasure, if you get on the right, if you use the right stimulant and get on the right frequency, is a pretty fabulous notion. If you're a curious human being, as we all are.
Yeah. Well, bravo to Jeremy and you, Rob.
Terrific. And the three of you, a magnificent conversation. And I hope we'll continue with Jeremy Narby, because I feel like we're just beginning to plumb the depths.
And the Biglino, I bet we could do something with Mauro and Jeremy.
I really like that idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mauro's in Turin, Italy, and Jeremy's not too far.
Right.
No, he isn't.
Jeremy's pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can ponder all of this offline.
Yeah.
I should say thanks to the Marion Institute, and of course thanks to the three brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip, for making this continued Three Brothers quest possible. And I can't wait till our next conversation, gentlemen.
Me too.
Good.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
See you soon.
Yeah.
See you soon.